Good evening and happy Monday to everybody who might be listening. I hope you had a holy and edifying weekend. And I am happy to be joining you all tonight. And yeah, I've been thinking about something that happened last week. Jacob, friend of the show, Jacob, came on to the stream early on, and he described to me a phenomena of things that I had never encountered or considered before. Basically, certain type of internet personality who identifies himself as a lol cow and begins to broadcast themselves in a way that's generally not edifying or uplifting, but seem to be setting themselves up as a buffoon there. And sometimes Jacob will come on and he will set me up for a statement. He wants to hear what a Catholic priest would have to say about this. And I didn't have anything particularly profound ready to go, but I've had a week to think about it, and now I have things to say. And in order to respond to this idea, I want to think about church, and specifically the sacred architecture in a church here. That church, there could be a variety of different ways to set up churches, complementary necessarily, but they should all have a certain sacred architecture that indicates how you are to interact with them. So we can start from the outside. Starting from the outside of the church, you can behave how you want outside the church, and Father really can't tell you much about what to do. You'd have to be pretty disruptive in order to get a rebuke from me out on the sidewalk. So if you wanted to, smoke a cigarette or have a conversation with your friends, ride a skateboard, I won't have much to do with that. You don't have much contact with Father until you get to the walls of the church. The walls of the church are designed to keep things out, and most of the time people don't interact with them much. But I would be rather grumpy if you spray painted or graffitied them in some way. Once you get through the doors of the church, especially in more modern churches, this is one of the nice things that you get with more modern church architectures, that you enter into hopefully a large narthex. Newer churches are maybe a little better about this than older churches. The narthex is a gathering space. It's not a specifically sacred space, but it is designed to sort of mediate the outside and the inside there. A narthex would be an appropriate place to have a conversation that's not necessarily dedicated to sacred things. Narthex would be a decent place to conduct a bake sale. Narthex would be a decent place to play children's games, all sorts of things. There's a certain level of decorum and good behavior that would be expected in there. You're just outside the church, just through those doors over there. You've got the church. And so hopefully you'd be a little bit better behaved. But the narthex is a place of, it's a fairly relaxed place. Lots of different things can happen there. You pass through the doors of the church, you'll enter into the nave of the church, the main body of the church. Perhaps there's a choir loft above you. Perhaps the choir's seated some other place. And, in a modern style church, this is where the seating for the faithful is. And once you get into the nave of the church, things are a little bit different there. There's now, at least in places where things are being done properly, a much higher level of behavior there. We really should not be engaging in chit chat inside the nave. Yet you have entered into a place that is designed for prayer. And, we usually aren't that harsh about it, like in a downtown church, let's say. Maybe a homeless person stops in there to warm up. If they're well behaved, maybe we'll just let them sit there. But if it began playing music loudly or being obviously disruptive, they'd be asked to leave pretty quickly there because the nave isn't necessarily for everyone. You need to have business there in order to be properly engaging with the space. Not everybody should have access there. Not every sort of activity is acceptable there. When you move forward into the church, there's usually an elevated or otherwise set aside area um, called the sanctuary. Oftentimes elevated, or maybe there's some kind of uh, blocking off on it. That right there, we're getting to a very holy place. You ought not go into the sanctuary without a good reason. That's where the altar is. That's where the pulpit is. That's where the tabernacle is, and it's an elevated and more sacred space there. So if you just wanted to pray quietly in a church, that's a great thing to do. But the place for that is the nave. Going into the sanctuary would be um, rather inappropriate to just pray quietly, even if you're not, misbehaving. It's not the appropriate sort of behavior there. And then finally, in the center of the church, or perhaps in some other prominent place, you would have the tabernacle. The tabernacle would be the most sacred place in the church, as far as I can tell. Maybe you could make an argument for the altar. We could hear that argument. But certainly, no one should be accessing the tabernacle unless they have a very clear and resolute reason for being there. It should, I think, ordinarily be accessed by those in holy orders. It seems the best way to do it there. So you've got these different layers to the architecture of a church. More and more common, more and more public on the outside. And as you move your way in, things become less public. You need to have more and more of a reason to be in there. And you should have a greater deal of reverence and a greater deal of respect. The closer and closer you get to the holy things at the center of the church, I would imagine if the temple in Jerusalem were still here, the Jews would have a similar opinion about the architecture of the temple, that they would want you to behave in a similar way. And as far as I can tell, Orthodox churches are built on the same sort of pattern there. Perhaps there are Anglican churches that might retain that sort of pattern, although with the lack of a firm belief in the real presence, the tabernacle might be excluded there. It's a fundamental pattern of life to have parts of you that are more external, and then the closer you get to the center, the less people have access to it, and the more the higher standard you hold to people who have access to those parts of the church. Now, if we're to take St. Paul seriously and say that human beings should be a temple of the Holy Spirit, that that's what we are called to be, especially as baptized and practicing Christians, that it makes sense that our own lives would be the same way, that our own lives would be, have parts of us that face out into the public, maybe parts of us that we share with a group of people that we kind of know, parts of us that we can share a little bit more intimately with a greater number of people, parts of us that we can share maybe only with a small, intimate group of friends, and then maybe a part of us that only God has right and proper access to, the very deepest recesses of the conscience there. That's what human beings are supposed to be like. The same sort of structure of these outer layers coming into the inner layers, that applies to human beings as well. And that's the way I've tried to conduct myself here out on the open internet. That there are certainly things that I stand for, things that I think are very important that I'm willing to share. My faith and my duties as a priest, those sorts of things. I'm happy to talk about and happy to share, but there's a certain amount of me that I'm not going to show to anybody who might happen across this video. That would be foolish of me to share things that are proper to the confessional, things that are proper to spiritual direction and proper to fraternity, not just with any priests, but those priests who are my closest friends. It would be very inappropriate for me to share that on YouTube for any reason, but especially for reasons to make people laugh. And I think that's one of the strange things that we are finding with these social media networks is, people go to these social media networks looking for a place of intimacy because we're dealing with, profound and sometimes crippling loneliness here. And maybe they get a thrill from observing somebody share things that are very intimate on a social media network with anybody in the world. Maybe they feel like they should be doing the same thing too. But I ultimately don't think that is a good idea and that is sustainable. There are certain things that need to be kept hidden, that need to get kept private, and that should only be accessed by a few people as a part of our lives. And so that's my response there. And if Jacob's listening, hopefully he finds that compelling. Hopefully this little ramble has made a little bit of sense to you. And hopefully all of us can let the light shine where it's supposed to, and to let only those who belong there into our lives. So, Zealots Den says, thank God it's Monday. Glad to have you here. Always good. Looks like we're getting a soup Monday. Dehydrate stuff for the pantry. Sandy says, interesting parts of the church. I don't think the Protestant one I was in last had some of these designated. Older ones did, I think. Yeah. There's a tendency to make certain Protestant churches look like shopping malls. And some Catholics copied that, and I'm not a fan. So, and we've got land worker here. Good to see you as always. Ixnon points out it's interesting how Protestant churches flatten these layers. Presently reading The City of God by St. Augustine. Oh man, yeah, and the first part of the Summa. That's some pretty intense reading right there. Yes, all sorts of things that we can be upset about. And we've got two of our faceless friends here.
How do I look, Father?
You look like you're growing a little bit of facial hair there. I'm trying to figure out where St. Peter's Basilica went.
I've lost. I think I've lost a little bit of weight.
Oh.
Or at least that's what I've been told by my family. I mean, I hope they're not just kissing my rear end, but I actually do think I've been eating a little bit better recently.
Well, good. I am here to encourage. I'm encouraging healthy eating, sound mind, and a sound body. There was some Roman who said that, and I think he was correct. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're Catholics, but we don't necessarily. I don't know. I guess we're not strict Cartesian dualists, right? I mean, I know what your position is, but it does seem as though the soul and the body have some interaction.
Oh boy, do they have a lot of interaction. I bet you Eastern Thomists would like to tell you all about that.
Yes, the body and the soul are one principle.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's how, right? That's how experiences in prayer work, right?
Right.
A certain movement of God in the soul might spill over even into the senses, but it might not too. It can work both ways. On account of the deep and intimate union between the soul and the body. That was maybe, I don't know what your experience was, but these a contemplation of the soul and body was one of the most difficult things for me to get my head around when I was studying uh, Aristotle and Thomistic philosophy there.
Yeah, or I
Really?
mean, since there's no true philosophy after Plato, according to my understanding of Marx's position, Thomistic theology. But yeah, I mean, Descartes. I don't know. Is he not well regarded by most modern Catholics?
Yeah, he was condemned by the church, so that should tell you everything you need to know. But for me, I would say the body soul composite when it comes to Aristotle and Saint Thomas. I mean, that was one of the things that just made that just instantly clicked for me. I mean, once I heard like, oh, that makes so much sense. That makes much more sense than the dualistic kind of view of it.
Yeah, I think, I don't even know how it got into me, but I had a lot of deep seated materialist reductionism inside of me as a kid who grew up in a Catholic church and, never had like any big, crises or rebellions or anything like that. But
Right.
once I started like being taught these things and these things getting pointed out to me, it was kind of a real struggle intellectually to kind of just let go of some of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
And thankfully it worked, right? Like but I almost think it had more to do with the daily liturgies and prayers that I was doing that actually made the movement. It was God's grace more than anything else. But the philosophy classes were good at like kind of sifting out the materialistic reductionistic thought and challenging it. So
yeah. I actually have a question about Catholic theology. If it's not too much to ask. Um,
No, it is too much to ask. You're not allowed.
so the question is, so I don't know how are you familiar with modern mathematics and set theory, Father?
set theory would be like Gödel and
Yeah.
incompleteness, like that kind of stuff.
No, well, so specifically the question is, it's about, so I don't, there's a mathematician named Georg Cantor who basically proved that, well, not, I'm going to say proved, he had a philosophical or mathematical opinion that there's different sets of infinity. And basically the idea is you can go 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5. But then you can
Mhm.
say, well, what about all the numbers between 0 and 1, 0.12, and so there's a greater number of numbers between 0 and 1 than there is from 1 to infinity. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, okay. That like the
and so the
multiple
question
sets
is
of
that
infinity.
compatible with the Catholic understanding of theology of infinity?
Absolutely, it is right. So, we use this term infinite in a multitude of different ways, right? And what you're talking about there is a numerical infinity, and numbers are a second degree abstraction inside of our heads. We use numbers to talk about and think about and describe the reality of quantity in the world there. And because these numbers exist inside our head, because they're abstract, um, you get a certain type of infinity there. And just as you point out, there's a infinite number of possible values between 0 and 1 that could be identified. So that would be the way that we would think about it because it's abstract, right? You can kind of do anything with it that you want because thought is really lightweight and really cheap uh, compared to time, energy, and attention in the world there. And we would want to distinguish that first off from this sort of infinity that's proper to potency. So you could look at, let's say, a 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot block of marble. You could imagine that there would be infinite number of shapes that could be carved into, because it's got the capacity to receive a huge number of shapes. Let's just imagine it's a marble of a sufficiently fine and pure quality there. But everything that you would carve out of it would still be made out of marble, right? You couldn't carve it. So there's like a certain potency for receiving shape there, which is infinite. There's no boundary on it, but it has to be. It is also finite, constrained potential in that everything that you could make out of it has to come out of a 10 cubed foot block of marble there. And then when we look at the sort of infinity that we predicate of God, that's of an entirely different quality. That can't be spoken of in the same way as a numeric or a potential infinity. And to use the proper term, that would be infinite act. The idea being that God is not at all constrained in his capacity to work in the universe. He's not at all constrained by anything. So we'd say that all perfections and all being pre-exists virtually in God, such that he's capable of making anything in creation, and also capable of creating things that don't yet exist, if he should so choose there. So that's infinite pure act. There's no boundary on his acting there. So this idea of numeric infinity is well explored and not at all threatening to the Catholic intellectual tradition.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I know there's discussions within Christians about like what does it mean to say God is infinite, and so it seems to say that like as long as you're specifying that the type of infinity you're discussing is numeric infinity, then there's no problem in saying there's different types of numeric infinity. Because ultimately it's still not going to be the type of infinity that God is.
Correct. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good way of thinking about it. Boy, talking about second degree abstractions brings me back to my second year of seminary. That was the heady days of 2012,
And I promise I did not do drugs to get to this question. This actually popped up to me.
Okay.
All right, I'll take you at your word.
And also even though I'm not Catholic myself, I did actually go to church a couple weeks ago. The
Oh.
Sunday before this previous Sunday. So
What sect are you?
I'm a Noahide.
I don't know what that is.
So
Yeah, okay. Just do you remember back in the Acts of the Apostle era when there were some pagans hanging out around synagogues,
Oh, yeah.
God-fearers?
Yep.
That's a thing now, but they call them Noahide. The idea is that they would keep the covenant made with all the nations between God and Noah.
Okay.
So it's I don't know. I know that Jacob, who was on last week, he'll talk about it sometimes, and sometimes he promotes it even. But it doesn't seem to be that well organized, and that's why I'm skeptical that it's got legs. But that's just what I think. So
yeah.
By the way, I recorded the audio for a 30-minute defense of the intercession of the saints today on my channel.
Oh man.
So that should be interesting. I tried to go over as much as I possibly could. I went into the Thomistic scholastic defense. I went into kind of the St. John Henry Newman defense. And then I tried to go over pretty much most of the popular objections to this practice.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. It's good. We got to have our voice out there, and it's there's a little bit of a performative contradiction sometimes with people. They maybe at one point will ask for their friends to pray for them, and they'll believe that that's effective because James says the fervent petition of a holy man is powerful indeed. And
Right.
then, won't call upon friends in heaven, even though we believe that if they've died with Christ, they would live with Christ. The life I no longer live is my own, but it's Christ living in me. Would we expect that to end with death? I don't think so. So,
Right. Well, the objection, I think the main objection and probably the biggest objection is they'll say, well, you never see, or they'll say, well, you never see an explicit command to pray to the saints. Like you don't see St. Paul say, hey, please pray to St. Stephen or something like that. And so they'll say, oh, well, this is the basis that you're not supposed to do that. But what I basically make the argument in the video is the principle that kind of the Thomistic principle that the entire church through charity, through the virtue of charity, kind of becomes united together under the one cause, which is the supreme good, which is God. And therefore, a person can merit one thing for another person, and that persists after a person dies. That's something that's very clearly in the scriptures. So like you can go to Hebrews chapter 12 when it says, you have come to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the spirits of just men made perfect. Well, who's that talking about? That's clearly talking about the saints in heaven. There's really not much else that could be referring to. Or you go to Ephesians chapter 4 when St. Paul says that the entire church becomes united by charity. Or even in the Synoptics when Christ says things like, if one or two is gathered in my name, I will be there. Or I pray that they may be one. So that principle that the entire church is united together, and therefore, other members of the church from heaven can merit for another person, is in the scriptures. And I make the argument that since the church is, the governing authority, they can promulgate certain doctrines that are implicit in the scriptures. So think of it like this. Like in the United States, we have the First Amendment, which says Congress will make no law, concerning freedom of speech, press, and religion. Now, the United States Supreme Court since then has promulgated the law to add provisions to that. For example, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. There was this one Supreme Court case where there were these kids who they were in school and they held up a sign that said bong hits for Jesus. And the Supreme Court said that even though it was a public school, the school had the right to suspend them. Now, the First Amendment doesn't say verbatim explicitly, Congress shall make no, law pertaining to speech, press, and religion, ... unless you have a sign that says bong hits for Jesus, or unless you shout fire in a crowded theater, or unless you threaten the life of another person. It doesn't say that, but it doesn't need to, because the United States Congress and the United States Supreme Court is the proper governing authority, so they can promulgate laws in ways that are implicit in the Constitution. And so I argue in the same manner with the scriptures, the church being the proper governing authority can promulgate certain principles that are in the scriptures. And so if the faithful are united in heaven and on earth, then they can promulgate that in ways that are useful to the faithful. And they can say, okay, since the church is united, and since we believe this guy who was a martyr or this woman who lived the holy life is in heaven, you can ask them for intercession. And I use St. John Henry Newman, and I use a lot of quotes from St. John Henry Newman to kind of support that.
Yeah. And, I think that sort of practice, right? Because like, I don't know how you would actually run a church just based on the New Testament.
Right.
Like you actually have to be able to draw those sorts of theological conclusions for the here and now. And like if you can't, then your church is going to be crippled. Like it's not
Right.
going to make any sense there.
Right.
And so it's I thought of this just a few weeks ago, and maybe somebody had said it to me once, and I didn't remember it because it didn't make sense, but it makes a lot of sense to me now. Seems like at the very crux of the so-called Protestant Reformation is this question of layers between us and God. Um, and how you answer that question determines what side you'll end up on. And
Right.
we're just gonna focus on the West here because it happened in the West. If you're saying that those layers are bad, you're going to end up in the Radical Reformation. You're going to have the Anabaptists, the
The
Quakers,
separatists.
the
Yeah.
Separatists, saying that all human beings should have unmediated access to God without any man getting in the way there. Um, so that's one answer to it. The other answer is the Catholic answer is like, well, these layers of mediation between us and God actually work. They're actually more effective, and they keep us safe. And
Right.
if you don't believe me, just read the book of Exodus when the sons of Aaron approach the tabernacle with strange fire. They die for that.
Right.
So what's the principle we should derive from that? Well, liturgical abuse kills people. And that's why you shouldn't do it, and that's why there needs to be authorities and people with responsibility who are able to determine, what is a safe and appropriate way to approach God, and what is going to be not helpful there. And
Right.
if you want to come up, if the answer is, well, we don't want to have any of this mediation, but then you end up coming with a different set of mediations between you and God, you get more of the magisterial Reformation, which was
Right.
always a little bit schizophrenic in the way it carried itself out. It had like some new theological ideas, and then some church structures that really weren't all that compatible, as far as I could tell. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and the principle does have to be, the basic principle does have to be in scripture. That is kind of the St. John Henry Newman approach. He'll say, kind of it has to be like an acorn growing into a tree. That's kind of what St. John will say in a lot of his writings. And so what I argue is the acorn in this case would be the idea that the saints in heaven and on earth are united through the communication of charity, which is very clearly said in verses like Ephesians 4:16, Romans chapter 12, Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 to 23, verses like that. But then the idea that you can promulgate that and say, okay, now we can use this to write prayers and devotionals to Mary or Saint Therese of Lisieux or Saint John Chrysostom, or you name it. That ultimately is something that would come down to promulgation. But since the church has the right authority to do that, and since they have the basis of the general doctrine in Scripture, they can do that. I also talk about I don't know how familiar you are with the Vincientin method. Um, Basically, it's this patristic model. It basically goes over the patristics. A lot of people tend to misunderstand how patristics are sort of understood in the Catholic Church. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, it means that Saint Augustine said this, or Saint Justin Martyr said that." So that means the Church takes it as gold, which is not true. One of the things that Saint Vincent of Lerins will say, and St. Robert Bellarmine kind of expands upon this a millennia later, is the idea that when it comes to patristic testimony, one specific person doesn't really mean much. Like, for example, Saint Cyprian of Carthage is venerated as a saint in the Catholic Church. He's a church father, but he believed that if you weren't baptized in the Catholic Church, no matter what, you have to get rebaptized, period. Which obviously the Catholic Church doesn't believe in today. So that's something where he's a church father who's venerated as a saint. We don't agree with him. But when it comes to a consensus, that is to say, when a number of the patristics, kind of unite in a specific view on a controversial matter, that's a sign of the Spirit working. And that's something that St. Vincent holds to. That's something that St. Robert holds to when it comes to the patristic testimony. And so if you use that and you apply that with the intercession of the saints, even going back to St. Justin Martyr, who's very, very early in terms of patristics, I mean, they all universally believed that asking the saints for intercession was something that was a practice that was completely compatible with Scripture and revelation. There's really only, I mean, some Protestants will say that Origen of Alexandria opposed it, but that's actually not true. If you read his dissertations on that, his objection was that people could ask creatures for things like miracles and divine power that you could that only God could do, which is not what the Catholic position is at all. But that was his only objection. He didn't have any objection with asking the saints for intercession. The only patristic who explicitly opposed asking the saints for intercession was a guy named Orius, who Saint Epiphanius
He
writes
sounds
about.
like a junior varsity church father to me.
Right, exactly. But his thing, what Saint Epiphanius basically writes is his his objection was that when he believed that when a person died, they weren't completely removed of their sin, and so that basically distorted a person's view of the beatific vision, which basically meant that a person's intercessions were completely distorted and they were useless because they weren't completely filled of the sin. They weren't completely sanctified of the sin that they had committed in their lives, and so they weren't in a position where they could intercede for people. Now, that he was the only church father to hold that view. He was condemned by the entire church for that view at the time he lived. But also notice how none of those views have anything to do with the most of the general objections that Protestants have today about intercession of the saints. So he's the only guy. His views had nothing to do with the views that Protestants had. I mean, he completely supports the idea that saints can intercede for you. He just thinks it's useless. And that's the most scarce kind of objection you can find in the early Christians to this practice.
We got a question from the audience here. Could you remind us of the name of the B Squad church father that got intercession of the saints wrong?
Yes, it was Orius.
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 Now, since you've been reading about intercession of the saints here, it's just a question that I've been meaning to get to the bottom of right now.
Sure.
So, I understand completely that when I was at the tomb of St. Robert Bellarmine in October, or early November, and I lit a candle there and I asked for his intercession for my JCL thesis, that was just intercession, and that sort of thing's real clear for me, that he's going to ask God to get me the actual graces I need to just write the daggone thing so it can be done. Right?
Right.
I'm really curious about prayer to St. Michael and our guardian angels, because it doesn't seem like that's quite the same thing. I kind of feel like, if I'm seeing something spooky and potentially preternatural, and I'm asking St. Michael to show up, that he's not interceding with me for God to let's say, dispel a demonic presence there, but that he's actually just going to show up and do his job. Um, I
Well,
don't know if you've
there is
been
that.
reading about that.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, he is in a situation where, through secondary causality, he can cast out certain spirits. Of course, unless you're a Seventh Day Adventist and you think Saint Michael and Jesus are the same person, but we won't get into that. Um, but I mean, yes, it is true that he can show up, but that doesn't mean that his intercession wouldn't be efficacious, because he is still in a position where he is close to God, and he is informed of charity. He's more informed of charity, which means that if a person is going through a specific spiritual battle, the same principle would apply in the sense that Saint Michael could, yes, Saint Michael could just fight off the demons, but he could also, inform your prayers more, since he's in a situation where he's closer to God and more informed of charity, and thus he could, there's more he could inform your prayers of. So yes, I would say that he could just show up and through secondary causality, he could just kick the demon out. But again, since we also have to, consent to, kind of turn away from sin. If we're trying to turn away from sin and we're trying to consent to willingly turn away from sin, it is also efficacious that we have our prayers informed and better informed. And, the angels still have the ability to do that because they're still informed of charity in that regard.
Yeah, because we would always expect the angels to be mediating something good from God.
Right.
Um, what is it exactly that they would be mediating then? Um, informing our prayers. That's certainly a useful thing. I'm never going to say no to that. Yeah, I don't know. Just more things to ponder.
Yeah.
I still, will just pray the Saint Michael prayer, and not really trouble myself with how exactly it works, because it's been given to us by the church and is useful and efficacious. So,
Yeah, and I think if you're asking how it works, I think a prayer from Saint Michael could work in the sense that it informs the person who is praying, and kind of gives them more enlightenment so that they don't consent to the things that are going to bring about demonic attacks out of the world.
yeah, yeah, and I remember, the smartest Thomist I ever met, and I bet you, if you met him, you might agree. He would always tell us that when we're studying or when we're taking tests, his tests specifically, that we need to pray to our guardian angels, because they have the capacity to stimulate our intellects and our memories, and that's one of the things that they can do there, which
Yeah.
seems to be a little bit different than regular old, not that regular old intercession is any less wonderful or excellent, but it just seems to be a little different to me that they would have that capacity to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to asking someone for intercession, it's not so much. I guess when it comes to taking a test and having to be informed of specific or having your knowledge increase so that you can do well at the test. I don't think it's so much that, well, I prayed to Saint Michael, or I prayed to a human spirit, like I prayed to Saint Therese of Lisieux, and now they have the power to magically, grow my brain. I think the idea behind that would be that when a person
is more disposed to grace, that advances their nature. That there's the old St. Thomas quote: "Grace does not destroy nature; it perfects it." And so I think the idea when it comes to an angel or it comes to a saint is that when the angel prays for you or when the saint prays for you, that can more dispose you to grace by the efficacy of their prayers. And the more disposed to grace you are, the more that advances your nature. So if
A righteous man prays for you, and that better informs your prayers of charity, that better disposes you to grace, and that's going to allow you to think clearer. That's going to allow you to be more focused on what is good and what is right. And that would increase your nature to a point where you're able to do better on the test. It's not so much like a magic superstitious charm where oh, I buried a St. Joseph statue in the ground. And so now I've got the magic powers where I'm super smart at doing my quiz. It's not the superstitious magic spell. It still involves human cooperation. But again, because of the efficacy of those prayers, I think it still advances the person's nature to where they're better disposed to grace and they're better disposed to the to knowledge and whatnot.
Yeah, but Dr. Hip told us that our guardian angels could stimulate our memories and intellects. So,
well, they're closer to God. I mean, they're closer.
But it's like it's a specific power. Like, you can think about those are, there's something crazy about the demons and intellects where they can't really access it. But the demons can, one of the ways they tempt us is to put an image into our imagination or to stimulate a memory of sin to try and get us to go back to it.
Right.
So he was drawing the point that we can have the good angels use those powers for good,
right,
instead of it all being evil there. So that's the kind of mediation. We would, of course, assume that our holy guardian angels would be acting on God's will that they had been given to them and empowered by God to be able to do that. It would all be ultimately under his governance and under his guidance there.
Yeah.
But it just seems to be like there might be, this is just further research for you and maybe even another video idea. Is there something specifically with the angels that's maybe a little bit different than, my prayers to St. Joseph or St. Robert Bellarmine?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the same principle applies, but obviously they're in a different position because an angel is created, to assist God, which means the angel is going to, have more than a saint would inherently, because one of the principles of, Thomistic theology is God gives more grace based on the responsibility of the person. And so, or the responsibility of the creature, I guess, in this situation. And so, because the angels are given more responsibilities, they're created with more responsibilities, they're given more grace and more knowledge based on that. And so, an angel, because an angel is created in a position where they have this supernatural knowledge of God so that they can perform a specific task, that means they're more in a specific position to kind of see, especially our guardian angels are more in a specific position to kind of say, okay, this is what Father Sites needs. Father Sites asked me for intercession, but I understand more what he needs because of the grace and the knowledge that God gives me. And so now I'm going to retrieve that for him because I'm in more of a position to where I understand the types of things that he needs. And I think what, like you said too, about demons versus guardian angels, demons are able to look at a person and they're able to kind of see, like they don't have magic powers, but they're able to see, okay, this person is acting a certain way. And so I'm able to kind of judge by their body language and kind of judge by their actions, how I can kind of get to them and how I can kind of bring them down. That was one of the things with Lucifer when he was trying to tempt Jesus. He didn't understand everything there was to know about Jesus. And it wasn't like he could read Jesus's mind, but he tried to look at Jesus and he tried to make a judgment as to who he was. And he tried to say, oh, this is how I can kind of take Jesus down. Now, obviously, that didn't work because he was the Son of God and Satan couldn't fully grasp that at that point, which is why the things he tried to throw at Christ weren't really sticking when he thought they were going to stick. But that's kind of the basic gist of how demons operate. They see how people are acting, they see their body language, they see how they're talking, and so they kind of try to, come to a judgment as to how to throw everything at them. And guardian angels are kind of the opposite of that, because a guardian angel's natural end is, well, I have to protect this person from spiritual attacks. I have to protect this person from everything that's going to be thrown at them. So I'm going to try and, use the knowledge that God has given me to kind of provide for them, kind of like how a doctor would say, okay, I see that my patient needs X, Y, and Z, and so I'm going to provide for my patient based on that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think if it seems fitting to me, I suppose that if the evil spirits can move our intellects and our move our memories and our passions, even sometimes it makes sense that they would be able to. The good spirits should be able to as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like, think of a priest in a confessional. When a priest is in a confessional, the priest has to be in this position to where he can provide a remedy for the sin that's being confessed. And it's kind of like that with, an angel. When an angel is interceding, they are in a position where they can kind of decide, okay, this is what this person needs. Here's how I can retrieve that for that person through, me stepping in for that person.
Well, since we're so deep into the research right now, let's go ahead and take a look at it, huh? Since St. Thomas Aquinas is one of the patrons of this YouTube channel. We've got the Summa on the Action of Angels. We also have the Gurin Gold Rings collection. Very exciting stuff. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that. Whether an angel can enlighten man. And if you've never read an article of the Summa before, it's useful to remember that he starts off with disagreements to whatever position he's going to take. So that's what you see with objection 1, 2, and 3. Then he comes in with, on the contrary, from an authoritative source, then his answer, and then the replies to the objections here. So on the contrary, Dionysius says that the revelation of divine things reaches men through the ministry of angels. But such revelation is an enlightenment, as we have stated above. Therefore, men are enlightened by angels. So there's a mediation of knowledge there. Whether angels can change the will of man, to change the will belongs to God alone. So that's useful to know. Whether those things which are seen in dreams are seen by the imaginative vision, but the angel reveals things in dreams, as appears to Matthew 1:20, 2:13 and 19, in regards to the angel who appeared to Joseph in dreams. Therefore, an angel can move the imagination. So this is what I'm trying to really hone in on is what we're doing here. Both a good and bad angel, by their own natural power, can move the human imagination. This is explained as follows: for it was said above that the corporeal nature obeys the angel as regards local movement, so that whatever can be caused by the local movement of bodies is subject to the natural power of angels. So angels can move physical things, which is why certain possessed places you'll see, you hear banging in the walls and rattling of things. Now, it is manifest that the imaginative apparitions are sometimes caused in us by the local movement of animal spirits and humors. Hence, Aristotle says, when assigning the cause of visions and dreams, when an animal sleeps, the blood descends in abundance to the sensitive principle, and movements descend within it. That is, impressions left from the movements are preserved in the animal spirits and move the sensitive principle, so that a certain appearance ensues as if the sensitive principle were being changed by the external objects themselves. Indeed, the commotion of the spirits and humors may be so great that such appearances may even occur to those who are awake, as seen in mad people and the like. So, as this happens by the natural disturbance of the humors, so everything that Aristotle was talking about there was their understanding of how dreams worked. So, as this happens by natural disturbance in humors, and sometimes also by the will of man who voluntarily imagines what he's previously experienced, so also the same may be done by the power of a good or bad angel, sometimes with alienation from the bodily senses, sometimes without such alienation.
Interesting. Yeah, on my channel, my goal is to try and make videos about the most controversial aspects of not just the Catholic faith, but also the Christian faith in general. So I plan to do a video on, after this, I plan to do a video on the Immaculate Conception. I'm going to say why that makes perfect sense. Then I'm going to do one on purgatory and indulgences. And then I think I'm going to do one about slavery in the Old Testament, which all of those are like the big, like controversial things that like scare people away.
Yeah, and those, I think those are all good projects there. But a little bit of variety might be fun. You're really focusing in on the apologetics, controversial theology thing there, which like we got to have our people doing that. So if you've got the patience for it, go for it. But sometimes these sorts of deep dives into something really, really specific there might be useful even just for your own edification.
Yeah.
And maybe sharing the fruits
you.
of your labors with people would be a useful thing too.
I agree.
Also, speaking of controversial things, this is actually a subject matter which is not controversial within Christian theology, but it's about how to deal with controversial subjects. May I steer the conversation a little bit away from the angel?
Go for it. Yeah, we've been hitting the angels pretty hard here.
So within my own like religion, Judaism, there is a concept of lashon hara, which is like evil speech, which is basically gossiping about people negatively. Is there basically in Catholic ethics and Catholic, especially like Thomistic virtue ethics, is there an idea about how to avoid speaking about negative people who are controversial and in holding your tongue, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted the old master of that was well, he's not old, he's not that old, but St. Thomas à Kempis wrote about such things a lot in his Imitation of Christ that came out in like the 14th century, I think. Although sometimes people read it and get really discouraged because it was written for monks, and he's got the bar set like way up here, and people are like, I don't know if I could do that. It's like, well, you probably can, but like be patient with yourself. But the strictness he was holding people to there. But that would all be I think that all comes under the virtue of justice.
Yeah, and I think you could also say temperance as well, like knowing when to hold your tongue.
Yeah, because I do think in our society, gossip, especially on social media, is a real problem, especially as people are online, and attacking people for um, viciously is just all too common online. Um, so yeah,
So he goes through a lot of different things under the virtue of justice here. He starts off with sins in word, in judicial proceedings, inflicted by the judge, the accuser, the defendant, the witnesses, or the defending attorney. And then verbal injuries inflicted extrajudicially include reviling, backbiting, tale-bearing, derision, and cursing. So we have about as much detail as you could possibly want um, for the different ways that the sins of speech can be. So that's all from the second part of the second part, and the number next to it is the question number. So 72 through 76 are the questions regarding those things. I haven't studied these in detail, so I can't actually tell you which of these sins in speech are which. So
yeah,
there'll be some of
I
your own
appreciate it,
research
Father.
there.
And I'm glad to hear that the Catholic Church does have condemnation in such things, because I really do think that with social media algorithms, being able to have the temperament to know how you use your words and how important it is to respect other people's character with your words is unfortunately an underestimated virtue.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's like that's part of the reason why I'm not on X is because I'd probably just run my mouth there, and that would make things worse and not better. And I don't want to make things worse.
Yeah. Sandy has a question in chat.
Yeah, let's take a look at this. How does the topic of speaking about others fit in with places of talking about abuse, talebearing, prayer, intercessions were a quiet approach, but still abuse? Is this differentiated? Absolutely. Um, so, I, if we're talking about this question of abuse here, there's somebody we'll say is doing something wrong, and you are not in a position to be able to stop it. Uh, so it's and the authorities, people who are in a position to be able to stop it, maybe aren't necessarily going to know that this is going on, and it would very often, probably most of the time, would serve the common good that the authorities would be informed of this or that abusive situation, abusive patterns, abusive acts, um, such so that they could actually do something about it to punish the and discipline the wrongdoer. Depending on the case, they may need to conduct an investigation to get to the bottom of these things. But you're pretty safe morally uh, to be able to bring that before a legitimate authority there in order to prompt them on to a restoration of justice. And so that right there is one way, uh, because the problem with speech is something that can be used well, and speech is something that can be used poorly, and we've got to discern kind of a concrete situation there. So let's say you were aware of some sort of abuse. Let's say abusive speech by a priest. So he's just really berating people and being kind of nasty about it, and you decide you're going to go tell the bishop about that because it's a useful thing that needs to be done, and maybe you're quite right to make this report, and maybe the bishop's going to be able to make a intervention that's really going to be able to help things. But let's say that you're still kind of distraught and upset by it. Maybe even you were the target of that, and you are seeking sense making, seeking prayers, seeking advice, you come to talk to me about it. And it's specifically like, I here's what I saw, here's what I told the bishop, and I'm still upset here. That right there, you're coming to me asking for help. Uh, that would be, I think, not tail bearing, uh, but you're seeking out uh, wisdom and guidance from a priest there, somebody who you can trust to be discreet with this sort of information, who's got a certain level of responsibility and professionalism that they have expected of them, rather than going to go telling just anybody about it. Um, and if the authorities are inactive long enough, you might have to actually make use of reputable journalists to restore justice. I would say that you would need to exhaust the authoritative measures before going that route. But that might even be a useful thing to do. And unfortunately, sometimes when the authorities are not inclined to act when they really should, sometimes it's only widespread revelation of this that prompts them into action there. So, Sandy, I hope that answers your question. Sometimes tail bearing isn't really tail bearing, but is useful and honest speech that builds up the whole body, even if somebody's reputation is hurt. So, yeah. So that's what I've got.
Sorry, I was just using the restroom. I didn't really keep up with what you were just saying, Father.
I was answering Sandy's question, and I think I gave enough of an answer. If she's unhappy with it, she can ask more questions.
Yeah. So just how have you been in general?
I'm making okay progress on my thesis, so that'll be good. Writing on the reservation of the Blessed Sacrament in canon law. Just because I'm in the liturgy office right now, and sometimes people ask me questions about tabernacles, and I need to be able to answer them. Yeah, and had a good Thanksgiving. Yeah, and it's real interesting. This time of year, a lot of times priests are getting real busy, but because of the difficulty of travels and desire to not get stranded in blizzards, Bishop and I uh, travel a little bit less. So um, it's really not that busy for me. So this would be a good time to get some work done on my thesis.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear. It's good to hear progress being made. Have you had any time to sort of just meditate on things and just clear your head?
Well, yeah, every morning, my morning prayers, it's one of the advantages of the life of voluntary celibacy is that it should afford greater time for prayer and intimacy with God. And, as far as I'm concerned, that's if you're not going to do that as a priest, then you should find something else to do because, yeah, not the appropriate sacrifice. Hey, Kirk, you want to shout this guy out?
I don't even know who this person is.
We'll shout him out. Shout him out.
Okay. I shout out Rufati, not 4901. There you
Okay.
go.
There we go. We got him. We got him shouted out now.
Yeah. Speaking of voluntary celibacy, I actually have a question kind of related to that. So,
Sure.
does this not seem to principle of the Catholic Church not seem to violate this principle in the Bible of being fruitful and multiplying?
Yeah, well, certainly that is a principle there. Can you think of any legitimate reason for a person to not do that, according to your lights and your understanding?
So my understanding, informed by Judaism, is that the specific mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply does not apply to Gentiles, but that's like assuming like a certain like dual covenant type theology, which Catholics completely reject.
Okay,
But
so
in
like
terms of
let's. I want you to even imagine, according to what you've heard from, let's say, a reliable source on these matters, if you've ever heard of a rabbi um, who would have judged like, well, in this case, this person is not bound by that obligation. Maybe you haven't studied that, which is fine. I just
yeah, I don't know what if I mean if we're assuming that it applies to everyone, which I think would have to be the Christian position. Um, I don't know how it could be an exception, but maybe you could elaborate on this because I haven't really looked too deep into this, to be
okay,
honest.
that's fine. Yeah, and nobody can study everything, right? So in Christian moral theology, a positive moral norm is always binding, but not everywhere, right? So a command to do something is always binding, but not everywhere. So um, let's imagine something like feeding the poor, right? We have this moral obligation to um, feed the poor. That's always binding, right? So it's not like it ever goes away. But when I'm sleeping tonight, am I sinning if I'm not feeding poor people?
Yeah, not necessarily.
No, no, because I can't constantly be doing that, um, and nobody would reasonably expect one of these positive moral norms to be uh, constantly by everybody being fulfilled there. So these positive moral norms are very distinctly contrasted with negative moral norms, commands to not do something, and it's always possible to not do something sinful. Right? You always have the option of not stealing things.
Yeah.
There's never a
Okay.
time when you're like gonna have to steal somebody else's property. Uh,
Yeah.
so, um, so we got to treat these positive moral norms and these negative moral norms differently. So if you're
Yeah, that
looking
makes sense.
at, a 10-year-old child, like that's a real easy example you could have come up with. It's like, well, nobody's expecting a 10-year-old to be fruitful and multiply right now, right? Like that's absurd. It's uh, yeah, we don't want that. We're not looking for that. So it being a positive moral norm, it's binding always, but not everywhere. So there could admit of exception. So we open that up, and
Yeah.
then maybe you don't find that all that uh, compelling, but we when we look at celibacy in the Catholic Church, we see that as a participation in um, the fruitfulness of God. Um, that it's no mistake that people would call me father. That I am still participating in an entirely spiritual way in the fatherhood of God. Um, not according to the flesh, but in a real way. Um, and so, according to that view, we would be us priests and those who are similarly consecrated would still be fulfilling that command, even if not in an ordinary way there.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So it's the idea that for negative commandments they always apply in every context, but for positive commandments they apply in specific contexts. And the context of so with regards to being fruitful and multiplying, it's just different if you're consecrated to the church because you're in a different context and you have different responsibilities, and so you're in a sense being fruitful and multiplying, but not in the way that other people do because your context of decision making is different. Okay. So yeah, then maybe that would just go into the fundamental question of, you know, is it being fruitful and multiplying if you're a Catholic priest? And that assumes that the Catholic theology is right. And I'm not a Catholic, so I don't accept that. But that is fine. We can agree
Yeah.
to disagree on that.
And then Sandy's question here can get us a little farther. We look to Christ himself as the model for that. Jesus, who said that doing my Father's will is the food that sustains me. He says that foxes have their dens and birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And then we also look to the example of St. Paul, who was either, some sort of a bachelor or perhaps had been married, but his wife passed away, and his some of his teachings on that. So as far as we're concerned, it's an eminently biblical understanding of things. It's not. But it is definitely New Testament. We have a tradition that Jeremiah was celibate, but I don't know if you would share that, and sometimes that's just how it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look more into the Jewish perspective on this. I have another question about Catholic theology, but real quick, you can answer anything in chat if you want.
Yeah, no, Sandy seemed to like my answer, and I would just point out to Castle. Castle's is young and maybe hasn't studied these things yet. That the availability for ministry is a reason for celibacy, but it is not the most important reason for celibacy. It's a tertiary reason. The most important reason for celibacy is intimacy with God. The second most is to give an eschatological witness, pointing to the age where they are neither married nor given in marriage. And then the third one is the availability for ministry there. So you're not wrong. I just want to put those things in their appropriate hierarchy there.
Yeah. Okay. So my question about Catholic theology is, so correct me if my understanding is mistaken, but my understanding is within Catholic theology, there is an idea that God can voluntarily give grace outside of the church, right?
Yes, God's
Okay.
absolutely in charge. He can send his Holy Spirit to do whatever he wills.
Yeah. And so the question is, how do you reconcile this with John 3:3? Because when I told this doctrine to a Protestant friend of mine, or they were saying that, some Protestant friends of mine, they were saying that this contradicts John 3:3 because it says, I believe Jesus' answer to Nicodemus in John 3:3 is something like, one cannot be saved unless one is born again. And so the idea is that if you're saying that people can have grace outside of the church, this contradicts this idea that you can't seek the kingdom of God unless you're born again through Jesus in John 3:3.
Yeah, sure. So this would always be the action. So we're imagining something that could happen. So that's what we're talking about here. And since it falls, outside of the visible boundaries of the church, it's not something that we know for sure is happening. Like we know for sure that that the sacraments work. We know for sure about ex cathedra statements and some of those things. But it would ultimately be still, the Holy Spirit drawing somebody to the Son, and then Jesus saving that person and bringing them to the Father. So it would still be, if such a thing were possible, or such a thing is possible, if it were to happen, it would still be Jesus saving them by the merits of his cross. And the way that St. Thomas describes this happening is you'd be infused with the virtue of faith, even without having heard the proclamation of the gospel. So it would still be, even if it was never actually explicit, faith in Jesus and what he accomplished that would end up being salvific, according to, we'll say, the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas there. But again, because it happens outside the church, we can't be certain of what extent this actually happens, or even if it actually happens at all. So,
Okay, that makes sense. So the reasoning is that, like, basically, we don't know whether it happens, but the reason it's a conceivability or possibility is because um, the idea is that one is not necessarily directly proclaiming Jesus while he lives, but after death, one will be granted what Jesus.
it's more like, the saving faith of the church, which, the saints hold explicitly and consciously. God could, by his grace, give them an implicit and maybe even unconscious participation in that grace,
Okay,
in that faith.
so it's like God would implant the belief unconsciously in a person.
Yeah, or like with the lacking of explicitness, So, yeah, and I'll go out into speculation land. A person who was being so moved by the Holy Spirit um, would have a sense of a transcendent spiritual power, which they owed their allegiance, and which would reward um, good behavior from them. And you can even see that um, in the letter to the Hebrews there, chapter 11. To believe in God and that he rewards those who seek him is kind of the fundamental kernel of faith there. So I'd be very surprised if there was, if I got to the heavenly kingdom and found somebody who had been saved without explicit faith in Christ, who didn't at least believe in a transcendent spiritual force that they owed their allegiance to, and a knowledge that they needed to live a certain, at least of a natural law, uh, to uh, to be saved.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So it's like if someone believes in something higher than themselves, it's possible that in the end God has sort of implanted some faith in Jesus on a subconscious level.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. It's spiritual level, entirely spiritual level. Whether or not that actually happens, we don't know, and that's certainly a harder and narrower path to salvation than full participation in the life of the church and in the sacraments. So, I hope that doesn't that the possibility of this really shouldn't slow the church's missionary efforts down, because they're not the same thing. It's better to be in the church.
Yeah. Um, and well, what's funny is my Protestant friends who I asked this question to were criticizing Catholics for having this allegedly non-biblical teaching. But what's funny is they believe in something which I don't know if you would consider biblical, which is reincarnation. Um, so basically, to my understanding, they believe that for some people there's a possibility of reincarnation, so that way they can fulfill their mission on Earth if they didn't have enough time in this life. But I don't know if that's at all compatible with Christian doctrine.
Yeah, I mean that's explicitly condemned by the Catholic Church, and I think there's something, like the letter to Saint Peter, where it says it's given a man to die once and face judgment. So I'd be very curious if you were able to come up with a scriptural. That'll be your homework. Go get a scripture citation from these guys and bring it to me so we can evaluate this on its own terms, because it's a little goofy there.
Yeah, Protestants, am I right?
Oh, those Protestants up to no good as usual. There's a GIF from a TV show called Father Ted. That was a reference to that. It was playing
Yeah.
back in my head, in my memory. So
Out of curiosity, have you ever ministered to someone or helped someone convert from Protestantism to Catholicism, like in a conversion process?
multiple times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of the Roman Catholic Church. I don't know if I'm as anti-Protestant as Mark is, but yeah, I
I
will
mean,
will say.
honestly, you might just not be as strongly everything as friend of the show, Mark Lefebvre. You know, he's just a strong cup of tea in general. Whatever he's doing, very strong reactions to everything. So
Speaking of which, where is Mark? Is he in Europe again?
I don't think Europe. I bet you he's in England, visiting his family. Extended Thanksgiving. That's a guess, though. I actually don't have confirmation on that.
Okay. Oh, speaking of which, belated Happy Thanksgiving, Father,
Thank you.
and Merry, I guess, early Merry Christmas.
Happy
Um,
Advent is what I want to
Happy
say right
Advent.
now. But I feel like I've ranted about that too much on this channel, so we're not
Is
ranting
Chris
about Advent this year unless I get tricked into it.
is Christmas not a Catholic thing?
Oh, it is right. But so in the Catholic Church, we've got preparatory seasons for major holidays. So maybe you've heard of Lent before.
I have.
Yeah, so Lent is that 40 days of preparation for the celebration of the Paschal Triduum and all of that. And Christmas is an important enough holiday that it has its own season of preparation. That's called Advent. And then
Oh,
once we get to December 25th, that's when we begin celebrating Christmas. But I think Walmart and other associated principalities have figured out that it's easier to separate people from their money if they end up celebrating Christmas early. So we have this unfortunate habit as Americans of celebrating Christmas before Christmas shows up, and then by the time we get to Christmas, we're all puking sick of Christmas because we've been celebrating it nonstop since Thanksgiving. Then we're depressed in January. And, I believe you're in the Southland, and it might not be quite as essential to you. But up here in the North, being depressed in January is very depressing because it's just cold and dark all the time there. And the church has a remedy for this, is that you do a little bit of fasting, a little bit of preparation in the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. And then when Christmas shows up, that's when you start celebrating it. So you may have noticed that sometimes I've got a can or a glass of something that accompanies these live streams, but not tonight, because tonight is Monday of the first week of Advent, and we should do a little bit of penance to prepare our hearts. So
yeah. Sandy has a question in chat. Father Big Mac.
how do you describe Advent? I've been describing it. Yeah, it's and specifically, so there's this real funny thing when you get to the beginning of Advent. You're like, if you don't know or you're not expecting it, you might be, thinking, oh, right at the beginning of Advent, since we're getting ready for Christmas, um, we're going to be preparing for Christmas, which means, first Sunday of Advent, we're going to hear about, prophecies of Isaiah, maybe, or the angel visiting Joseph, or the angel visiting Mary. And then what you actually get on the first Sunday of Advent is Jesus prophesying about the second coming and the end of the world. It's because in our mind, we've got kind of the two bookends of the age of the church, the birth of Christ, and then his return at the end of time to judge the living and the dead there. And we kind of prepare for both simultaneously. like our preparation to receive the news of Jesus's birth at Christmas is actually the appropriate preparation for receiving him at the end of time when he comes again in glory there. We do that by practicing the reception of Jesus in spirit and truth there. So that's kind of the character of it, and why the first coming and the second coming are both a focus of Advent. And then you focus on the second coming first, and then once we start getting close to Christmas, we start focusing more on the first coming of Jesus there. Are there considered to be stages of his return? Does anyone know? The sign of the Son of Man will flash in the sky from east to west, and on the last day, the trumpets sound, and the dead will rise. So I don't think it's going to come in stages. I think it's going to be a discrete event that nobody will miss, according to the testimony of Scripture. So.
And God willing, it be in our lifetimes.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not up to me, but yeah, I'm trying to practice what I preach, and I'm trying to be ready. So
Yeah. So yeah, I'll ask my friends if, I mean, they said it's not based on the Bible. So they said it's just a personal speculation of theirs. But it seems not only to not be supported by the Bible, but it also seems to be inconsistent with the Bible. Because like I could conceive of a belief which is not supported by the Bible, but I don't think it would be necessarily like condemned by the Bible. But you're
like
right that
general relativity.
yeah, or scientific laws, right,
Yeah,
in general.
yeah.
But so what was the verse you were saying that was
I don't have it at my fingertips. I would need to make use of a search engine, but I'm pretty sure there's something in St. Paul. It was like, just as it is decreed that men die once. Oh, that's what I'd be putting into the search engine. If I felt like interrupting the very smooth movement of this live stream with no interruptions or decisions to pull up other Bible verses. But I don't really know where it is. So
yeah,
I'll find
I'll
it.
look it up in my free time, and I'll provide it to them because if it is inconsistent with the Bible, I mean, are you certain that it's at the very least condemned by post like biblical like the Catholic Church?
Oh yeah. No, it's the judgment. The teaching is that each individual faces judgment immediately after death. That's very solid there. That's Catholic doctrine.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not, you're not like agnostic about it. Like you're certain that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean the main argument that I think they provided for reincarnation is just the fact that there seems to be some people who testify to experiencing another person's life, but you could probably chalk that up to neurological issues.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what's going on there? I would want to, if I was going to actually pass judgment on such cases, I would want to examine the person carefully and see what the cause of that might be. Because human beings are funny creatures, and we're never quite sure what they're going to get into.
Yeah. Um you sound like you're kind of tired, Taz. Are you wanting to wrap this stream up?
We could wrap the stream up if you've got any more
I just got I have
questions.
one more.
I could do one more question. That's
Okay.
good.
So we were talking the other day about a couple live streams ago. I think we were talking about aliens, and you were saying that it's possible that aliens have human like soul if they're rational animals, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we
And
can't rule
and
that
so
out.
the question I have is, A, so there's two parts to this. A, is it possible there's basically an alien Jesus? And B, would that alien Jesus be fully God and fully man in the same way human Jesus is?
Yeah. So, insofar as the church authorities have spoken on this subject, they've said very little, and it's sort of that's super speculative, right? Because it may be the case that we are the only rational animals in the universe that God is creation. Ah, there it is. Ixnan's got it. It's Hebrews 9:27. I I don't know how you get around that. Um,
Yeah.
so Hebrews 9:27. There you go. Yeah, so it's just really a question that we don't consider all that pressing to get to the bottom of, and the authorities are quite happy to leave it very open. Um,
Okay.
so, like, is that possible? I suppose God could do that. Um, Yeah, but the point is that he said that these were Protestant friends of his that were playing around with reincarnation there. So I think that's yeah. I'm not trying to. I mean, Kirk's off doing his own thing. He doesn't. He acknowledges my authority over the live stream, and that's good enough for me tonight. But yeah, it's just really not that important of a question. If these aliens showed up, we'd need to go answer it. And I've always thought that there was a sci-fi story that needed to be written about aliens figuring out that this is the planet where it happened, and Earth becomes um, a pilgrimage planet, and maybe even a site of war over different tribes of aliens. Wouldn't that be a at least like a fun little sci-fi short story? You know.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. That makes sense. So the reason I asked, Father, is because so I think it would make sense logically as a possibility. It's just I just wanted to know if there would be metaphysical issues with the idea that you could have multiple fully God, fully human incarnations of the Trinity. But you seem to be saying that that's kind of an open question now. And it, like, whether or not there's an alien Jesus is just so speculative that we really can't even say that.
right. Yeah. It's like the church doesn't want to settle a question unless she really has to, and she usually prefers to settle questions as conservatively as possible. So, because there's literally no reason to wade into this and settle it, it's very open, and most people don't consider it that interesting of a question. It's like it'll get interesting when they land, on the White House lawn, but before that, like, it's just I don't know, we don't really bother
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it is dark, Kirk. It's probably even dark where you're at, and we're quite perceptive. I am ready for bed, so we'll just go ahead and wrap this stream up. But even if it's wrapping up a little early, I think we had some pretty good discussion. I'm glad you were part of it.
Good night, Father.
So good night, and God bless you all.
God bless.